What started as a simple trip to the grocery store turned into a moment the entire town would never forget. An elderly woman, loud, angry, and stuck in the past, looks a young black man in the eye and spits out one of the most racist things you can say to someone. Go back to Africa. The store falls silent. Everyone freezes. But what happens next doesn't just silence the woman. It silences the entire crowd. Not with shouting, not with anger, but with truth, with history, and with a response so powerful it leaves everyone speechless. You won't believe what he says, and how it changes everything. Stay with us until the end, because this story isn't just about one moment. It's about the power of words, the strength to stand tall, and how one man's calm response to hate sparked a wave of change. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. It was a regular Saturday morning at the Hillview Market, a small neighborhood grocery store in Atlanta. Families filled the aisles, chatting and grabbing what they needed for the weekend. Kids ran to the candy section, and workers restocked shelves quietly. One of the shoppers was a tall black man named Malik. He was 29 years old, wore a black t-shirt and jeans, and had headphones around his neck. He worked as a high school history teacher, known for being calm, patient, and always respectful. Malik walked into the store carrying a small shopping basket. He smiled at the cashier, nodded at a woman passing by, and headed toward the produce section to grab some bananas and spinach for his smoothie. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. At the same time, an elderly white woman, probably in her 70s, stood near the same section. Her name was Miss Margaret, a longtime resident of the area. She wore a pink cardigan and pushed a cart that squeaked loudly every time she turned. She seemed frustrated, muttering something under her breath. As Malik reached for a bunch of bananas, their hands accidentally brushed. He immediately said, "Oh, sorry, ma'am," with a polite smile. But instead of moving on, Miss Margaret's eyes narrowed. She looked Malik up and down and then loudly said, "Why don't you go back to Africa where you came from?" Everyone nearby froze. A man with a cart full of soda cans stopped mid-step. A mother holding her child's hand turned her head. Even a worker stacking cereal boxes dropped a box from his hand in shock. Malik blinked, stunned. His smile faded. His hand tightened on the shopping basket. "Excuse me?" he asked softly, his voice calm but confused. "You people," Ms. Margaret continued, her voice louder now, "always taking over. This is America. Go back where you came from." The silence that followed was heavy. The air suddenly felt thick. No one knew what to say. Some shoppers looked away. Others stared, waiting to see how Malik would respond. The young cashier at the front stopped scanning items and leaned to see what was going on. For a few long seconds, Malik didn't move. He looked at the woman, his expression unreadable. 100 thoughts raced through his mind. He could yell. He could walk away. He could stay silent. But then, slowly, he took a deep breath and did something no one expected. He smiled. Not a fake smile. Not a sarcastic smile. A calm, knowing smile. And then he said, in a steady voice, "Ma'am, if you'll allow me, I'd like to tell you a little story." Just a short one. The crowd around them grew. People weren't shopping anymore. They were listening. Ms. Margaret scoffed, rolling her eyes. "I don't need any stories," she muttered. But Malik spoke anyway. "My name is Malik Johnson," he began. "I was born right here in Georgia. My father served in the military. My mother is a nurse who worked at Grady Hospital for 25 years. Ms. Margaret folded her arms but didn't walk away. "My grandfather," Malik continued, "picked cotton in Alabama when he was a child. He never finished school. but he always believed education could change lives. That's why he pushed my dad to go to college. And now I'm a history teacher, trying to do the same for the kids in our community." A woman near the canned foods section nodded quietly. A young man whispered, "Wow." Malik looked directly at Ms. Margaret and said, "You told me to go back to Africa. But my people built this country. We were brought here against our will, forced to work without pay, beaten, killed, and still, we survived. We didn't run away. We stayed and made America our home." Ms. Margaret's face went pale. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Malik continued, "When my grandfather wasn't allowed to sit at the same lunch counter as white folks, he still went back the next day and tried again. When my dad was the only black student in his college class, he kept studying. He pointed to his chest and said, 'I am their legacy. I am as American as anyone here.'" There were murmurs of agreement now. A teenage girl clapped softly. The crowd was listening not just with their ears, but with their hearts. Malik then looked around the store and raised his voice slightly. "Hate doesn't need a reason, but love needs courage. It takes courage to choose kindness. It takes courage to break the cycle." He paused, letting his words settle. "Ma'am," he said, turning back to Margaret, "I could have yelled at you. I could have said something ugly. But then what? We both lose. Instead, I choose to speak with respect. Because maybe, just maybe, you'll walk out of this store today thinking a little differently." The store was silent again, not because of tension, but because no one wanted to interrupt the power of what they'd just heard. Ms. Margaret looked shaken. Her eyes were wet now, though she blinked quickly to hide it. A man in a baseball cap stepped forward. "Brother," he said, "that was the most powerful thing I've heard in a long time. Thank you." Then a woman near the bakery aisle added, "You taught us all something today." Even the cashier at the front called out, "You handled that like a true gentleman." Malik gave a small nod, humbled but not proud. He hadn't done it to be praised. He'd done it because it was right. Ms. Margaret finally spoke, her voice softer now. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just—" She stopped, struggling with her words. "I guess I've never really thought about it like that." Malik didn't smile this time, but his voice stayed calm. "It's never too late to think differently. But we have to start somewhere." She looked down at her cart, her hands shaking slightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely loud enough to hear. Malik nodded. "Thank you for saying that." The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just stood still, feeling something change. After a moment, Miss Margaret slowly pushed her cart away. She didn't look back, but her face was different now, less angry, less proud, more thoughtful. Malik turned to pick up the bananas he'd dropped. A little girl nearby smiled at him and said, "You're really brave." He chuckled. "Thank you, sweetheart." A young man who had filmed the whole thing on his phone walked over. "Do you mind if I share this? People need to hear it." Malik paused. "Only if you share the full story. Don't just post the hate. Share the hope, too." The young man nodded. "I promise." Malik went to the register, paid for his groceries, and walked outside. The sun was bright. The sky was clear. Something had changed, not just inside the store, but in the hearts of everyone who had been there. That night, the video went viral. Millions watched it across TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. People from all over the world commented, "This man is a hero." We need more responses like this. That woman may have started with hate, but he ended it with grace. The story appeared on local news. Talk shows discussed it. Schools played it in classrooms. It wasn't about shame. It was about change. Malik didn't become a celebrity. He didn't want to. He went back to his normal life, teaching, mentoring students, helping neighbors. But something was different. Strangers greeted him on the street. Students asked him deep questions about race, history, and identity. Parents thanked him for setting an example. And somewhere across town, Ms. Margaret sat at her kitchen table, watching the video of herself, and the man who had shown her more grace than she believed she deserved. She reached for her phone and called her granddaughter. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice trembling, "can we talk about something? I have some things I need to learn." That conversation would be the first of many. Because Malik hadn't just silenced hate, he had planted a seed. And that seed was beginning to grow.